Hey, everybody, I'm excited to introduce my friend. It has been a while since he's been on here, and this hasn't been the first time this year, but it has been a while.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
has been a
Thanks,
while.
Evan.
Yeah. Mike, how you doing? Mike Jacob, lawyer for the Pacific Maritime Shipping Association.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Yeah, lots been going on.
Yeah, even today, Dave Cowell is in Carson City, and they were supposed to introduce their legislation, and there's all this buzz around it. First of all, let's work backward. What do you think of what the A's are doing in Carson City today, and how far they've gotten?
Just like you, I haven't actually seen anything other than what we've been hearing and seeing on Twitter and other news reports and things like that. So um, I think if we take a step back and we look at the big picture, the big picture is we still don't know really what's happening on the ground in Las Vegas. Um, but we do know what is happening in Oakland, and uh, that answer is pretty clear. Nothing. Uh, so, um, you know,
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Mike. Go ahead.
you only know what you know, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I would say to apropos to conversations you and I have had before on, and with other folks, uh, the A's have been really successful at getting the stage set for success on projects and then not following through on it. So just because they get the legislature to say, here's your path forward on, I don't know, a tax increment financing package, they did that here too. Um, the story hasn't been written. Um, and we don't really know what's happening. I mean, obviously, this is the place that they're forwarding their interest, but um, past this prologue, they did, the same thing for Fremont and for San Jose and for Laney College and for Howard Terminal. I mean, every next spot is the next spot, right?
I didn't think of it that way. So you're actually thinking this is uh, their version of Groundhog's Day?
They've got an MO.
Yeah.
And if you're the team ownership, your equity in the franchise hasn't gone down. Right. I mean, there's no, this is not a normal business, right? And
Right.
these are not typical developers. Um, so for most assets, if you're sitting on real estate and you're missing windows to develop them, there's carrying costs associated with that. Um, once you get an entitlement, you want to build or you want to spin it off to another development team as soon as you can. Um, that is not how this asset and how this business works. The longer they sit, the greater appreciable value their asset has, even if you're destroying it on the field. Um,
Yeah.
so there's it's just not a normal way of looking at things, and I think for a lot of people, they look
Because
at it,
this
they're like,
because
well, it doesn't make sense.
yeah, because of the scarcity element. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So we're not looking at it as if this is over. Um, you know, I think the mayor the other day misspoke when she spoke about the site being entitled, but she didn't misspeak when she expressed very honestly and truthfully what her position was, which was she would welcome the A's back at a bargaining table if they wanted to come back. And again, given their track record, I wouldn't write that off. Um, you know, and again, despite what we're hearing today from Nevada, it's not a done deal. No one's putting a pen to paper as far as we know. Um, they might potentially have a deal in concept, but again, even if you get it to the governor's desk, you get it signed, it's a financing mechanism that they may or may not ultimately use. And we've had that happen here, right?
Mhm.
I mean, we had them go to Sacramento. They got their own financing package passed by the legislature. And then when it came to brass tacks and you looked, where were they actually using that financing package? They weren't doing it.
Yeah.
Um,
But don't you think there's one difference here, though, Mike, where this time they have a partner in Bally's and also Journal Properties, whereas in the Howard Terminal context, they didn't have a partner at all?
Oh yeah, yeah. No. I think the odds of them coming back to Oakland are very low. They're acting. They're not covering their bases with Howard Terminal, right? So they didn't ask the port for even a de minimis extension of their ENA and their non-binding term sheet, which they could have done very cheaply. Honestly, I mean, if they had walked in and said, "We just need another 6 months. Here's $50,000," they probably could have gotten that.
Mm-hmm.
And but they didn't,
Yeah.
right? The way that they treated the mayor's office here, I think that the response you saw from Mayor Tao was very genuine, very direct, right? And that didn't happen because the A's were sitting around the table in a way that she felt that they were acting in good faith.
I got to ask you, though, uh, let's get into their heads for a moment collectively. What do you think triggered John and Dave to act the way that they did? I mean, I have my own ideas, but I'd like to hear what you think.
I don't know. Um,
Speculatively.
yeah, I'm going to preface this by saying that uh, the A's leadership team personally has not discussed anything with their project with us since July of 2019. So
Wow.
they made it personally their mission not to talk to us now for nearly 4 years. And so I would not, and again, this is not a normal business enterprise. So um, I would typically expect, and I think everyone else would too, when you're working with a developer or someone who knows how these deals work in a typical way, they'd be reaching out to their opposition pretty regularly. They want to get to yes, if for no other reason than just to check the box,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And to tell people, they have concerns, but we've tried to address them. We can't work with them. We've tried. We've been reaching out. Blah blah blah. They don't even try that. So at some point, I think a lot of what was happening in City Hall was kind of similar to that, although they were talking, and obviously different situation, right? But they didn't have a getting to yes kind of approach to things.
Right.
The very first reaction from the A's to the city council voting on their term sheet in July of 21 wasn't, "This is close, we can work it out, like we're looking forward to working with the city of Oakland as a partner." It was, as you'll remember, going to the media and talking about how raw a deal it was and how it wasn't their deal and they didn't know if they could do it and they're going to have to go
Mm-hmm.
to Las Vegas, and then you got the Golden Knights tweet after that and all that stuff. So their MO isn't getting to yes. And I've seen and read, and I'm sure you have too, a lot of the speculation that they tanked those conversations on purpose, either because they weren't planning on going through with the deal,
Mm-hmm.
or they didn't tank them on purpose and they overplayed their hand.
I guess for me, if I may, I don't.
Yeah,
I tend not to read out of the media because I got my own media company,
yeah,
and I'm kind of not kind of. I'm tired of the circle jerkism that goes on with these folks that want to call themselves journalists and all that other crap. I think, and we talked about this privately, and I'll just throw it out there. I think that they got tired. I'm talking about Dave and John of what, and I think I'm in a better position to say this than you are politically. Um, I think they just simply got tired of the Groundhog's Day scenario where every time they sat down, it was always, well, let's talk about affordable housing or where we the IR, as opposed to stuff that you and I have talked about, like in particular, if you're going to do a development agreement, which they never even got to,
right,
right?
right,
In fact, the last approval they had that was done was March 1st of last year, involving port transfer of responsibility for PIM permitting from the port to the city council, right? City council never took that up, but we still don't know if they finished the drawings,
right,
right?
right.
And that came out in the EIR court sessions that you were involved in.
That's right.
Did you ever get any clarification on that?
We're pretty sure they didn't. right?
Wow.
And so I think that is part of this whole process of trying to get to a place where they felt they had certainty. I'm assuming the A's felt they had enough certainty about moving forward, about putting money into the deal, right? I mean, they were carrying a lot of costs.
Yeah.
Now, from a development point of view, again, they're all sunk costs. There's no investment here. Um, but but I think they're carrying a lot of costs, and the question then for them became like, am I chasing good money after bad?
Hmm.
Um, do I want to spend more time financing the overhead of the staff in-house at City Hall that I need to actually process my permits and my environmental documents and the DA and all those other things? Is it worth it? If you've already decided the answer to that is no, that's why you don't show up with another 50, 100, $150,000 for the Port of Oakland to do your E&A. It's
Don't
not
you think?
because it's not a good deal.
I got to ask you, what do you think about the city asking them to do that? I don't like the idea because to me, it's an automatic hand grenade to kill your project if they run out of money or decide to go someplace else. What do you think?
I just think that's standard operating practice
Hmm.
everywhere. If you're walking in and you've got a project that requires that much special attention from the staff, for most of if you're going through the entirety of the EIR process, um, those are project costs and due diligence that you're going to have to take on anyways. You're going to hire the biologist. You're going to hire the person to do the soil remediation. You're going to hire the person to evaluate the toxics. You're going to hire a traffic engineer. Um, so it's not as if there's a lot of duplication of tasks you wouldn't have otherwise been doing. Um, so
See, that's why, if I may, though,
yeah,
that's why I thought that the best way to go was to establish the enhanced infrastructure financing district early and then basically draw off pay as you go funds to pay for the administrative cost so you didn't have to worry about the mood of the A's on any particular moment or whether or not they signed an agreement or how much they're paying or anything like that. And then not only that, if they bail on you, you can quickly pivot the project and finish it. You don't have to worry about where your money's going to come from.
well, that is definitely one of the differences between having a sponsored project and a non-sponsored project, right? So, the Coliseum EIR that was done by the city without an actual project in mind, it was done proactively. Um, you know, they weren't relying on a third-party source to do that. They did that on their own proactively. Um, this is a whole different ballgame, right? If you walk in, you're saying this is my project and I want to control it. Part of the reason why you would want to do that as a developer, if you're the A's, was something that we discovered when we were challenging the environmental documents, was you get to set the project scope. And so the project scope for this was their project, right?
Yeah.
So I just think, bring it back to the topic of like, what's next? If you're the A's, can you really focus? It's beyond just saying that you have parallel paths. Can you focus your design and development dollars in two different projects that are a zero-sum equation, right? The Coliseum and Howard Terminal were not zero-sum. They were, both going to be there. If you were sticking around in town, you could divvy up your dollars. But if you're actually spending the type of time and energy and money to get to Las Vegas, why would you spend money in Oakland
Yeah.
on the same project?
Yeah. And also, the project scaled down. Howard Terminal was a city within a city.
It was.
This is a ballpark. That's it. It's dramatic and it really shows the changes in the economy. But my question to you is, and I'll just throw it out there, to what extent should the mayor have gotten involved and gotten you two guys together?
I don't know Carolyn Goodman, and I understand this is in Clark County. So, were you talking about here?
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about where they're going to put a ballpark.
No, I'm talking about what happened here, and
Actually,
because that's still on the table, and there are people who still think the A's can come back.
that's a good question.
And as you know, I've felt that they were gone for like over a year now.
They were
Uh,
setting the mayor's office, Mayor Tao's office, was setting actually the table to try to get people back in the fold. So they were doing that with us. They had reached out proactively, um, very professionally, basically said, hey, we're a new administration. We want to get people to the table. We want to talk. We understand they were doing the same thing with folks in the community benefits and housing world as well. Um, Essentially trying to figure out if this was doable and if they had partners at the A's that were willing to sit down and talk, because that was one of the first things we said was like, hey, your project sponsor won't talk to us.
mhm.
And so, that's, I give them a lot of credit for trying to lay some groundwork. Um, I think those conversations, even though they're preliminary, were really positive. Um, but I also think it showed a commitment by Mayor Tao to actually try to basically get the A's to put up or shut up.
Mhm.
Um, it was kind of calling the question a little bit. Are you willing to actually deal with folks and do what you have to do to cut a deal? Um,
See, Mike, here's why you can talk me down off the ledge, but I felt that when the commissioner said last fall, I'm done talking about Oakland, and they had announced earlier in the year they were going to focus on Las Vegas, I felt that was the kiss of death for the project.
yeah,
And so what I'm talking about
yeah,
is what Libby should have done, not because by the time Shang got a hold of it, the politics and the movement were already set to be out of there. As far as I'm concerned, the A's were not to be even expected to stick around unless you're going to dramatically change and present to them not more money, because there's this idea that, oh, it was a money battle. It's not. It's a process battle. And the fact of the matter is the previous administration didn't have its process act together. So at what
yeah.
point, I mean,
I agree. And I also think the challenge for the previous administration was trying to balance being a project booster, which they were, and also a project entitler. Those are very different things. And I mean, to Libby's credit, from the very start with all of these conversations, and you know this better than most, I mean, she did stick to her guns on saying, I don't want City Hall to pay for these projects, right? Um, the problem was she'd already said yes.
yeah.
Um, and and then you pick a set of solutions which are time limited restrictions, and those solutions were, let's go get OPM, right? Let's get other people's money to pay for this. And if you want to actually lay it out as a City Hall versus the A's thing, um, I would say the A's didn't do as good a job getting private money to the table as well as City Hall did getting public money to the table. If you have a gap
Hmm.
in funding, and you're the project proponent or you're the developer, if you're not the A's, you have to go find ways to capitalize your project, right?
Right.
If this is a normal development and you're not a sports team, um, you don't get to turn around and ask for grants and all kinds of stuff like that. You need to find a way to do that, unless you happen to have something like, I don't know, tax increment financing to
Right.
work with on your project.
Mike, that's what bothers me, though. As a trained economic development officer, I came from the era where you mate a developer, like I was hired to do in the 10K project. I had a symposium. We attracted 20 different developers and real estate experts to my office, right? And we mated them together with parcels and everything. We got the developers.
Yeah.
We didn't wait for the private. We didn't wait for the developers to bring in each other, right? We got them. So I don't. I mean, in the context of what I learned how to do and did, I don't understand why we're rubber stamping what this government did and we're not turning around. There's no. other than us talking, introspection to say, hey, and it's all every politician is always defending themselves.
Let me turn that around the other way.
Okay.
If you're the developer, would, even though from that background, as the city, you'd be engaged in that process of trying to match people up and play matchmaker and find people. If you're the developer, would you sit back and let the city take the lead on all of your community outreach, all of your other mitigation work you need to do on your project?
Well, it's a good question because, well, here's the thing though. In my experience, yeah, because there are aspects, for example, regarding 10K project regarding benefits programs, property locations, streets, roads, the little maladies and idiosyncrasies of the project that then fall into community concerns. I don't expect them to know of that. And they expect me to help them with that. So it's very much like this. It has to be.
Right. That's
It
right.
has to be,
That's right.
and that's what I'm saying. We've forgotten how to do that, Mike.
Yeah. Yeah. I, I'm just saying, we got the opposite end of that. It wasn't even, we want to work with the city to work with you. It was just, talk to the port, talk to the city, from the project sponsor. And if you're and I think that's the problem.
Yeah.
If you're the developer, you need to be active. You need to be the prime mover. It's your money,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's your project. If you could take a step back and just say, would, as a developer, just in general, it could be the
Sure.
A's, it could be anybody, would you want to not be in control of the amount of potential mitigation costs associated with your project, or would you rather have the people in City Hall do it for you? You always
Well,
want to
yeah.
be in control of it, right? You don't
Well,
want to be committing to
it
you don't want
depends.
to be committing to project costs that you don't have a hand in.
Actually, frankly speaking, if you're smart, you do want the city to have some responsibility because, in the
Oh,
worst case, you can sue them.
absolutely,
You
absolutely.
know, you can
But,
sue them.
there's a balance there,
Yeah,
and,
yeah,
I'm thinking
and
back
I
to
know that
all
all
the
too well. Okay, you could sue them,
I'm
and
thinking about all the other projects that I've seen, where the balance goes the other way,
hmm
right? You have an excitable and very interested in getting the deal done constituency. It could be your labor force, it could be the city council, right? More than happy to Christmas tree your project, and all of a sudden it's really, really expensive. It's hard to get across the finish line. They might love your project to death, right? And I think that's where, if this was a clear shot, and if this is a long answer to your question, but if that was the situation with the city, where they had come in and said, hey, maritime industry, affordable housing folks, community, we actually want to deal with your problems, they would have put so many ornaments on that tree, it would not have been standing up straight anymore. And so I think that's part of why the A's were shutting down and dragging their feet.
you see, that's what I'm confused with. And I'll just say this briefly, and I want to get to what you feel the future of the project is out of respect for your time. But SB 293 Skinner actually spelled out the possible expenditures for taxing rate, everything from Head Start to affordable housing. Then, of course, we had AB 464 Mullen, which then threw in
Yeah.
relief programs for businesses impacted by COVID, right? My point is that none of that was spelled out because the city never followed that law. They never wrote an infrastructure financing plan. And everything was done, as you and I have talked about, on an item
Our
piecemeal.
mitigation projects were written in there, right? When we
Mhm.
went to Sacramento and we said we're opposed to this bill,
Yep.
they said, "What if we write you in?"
Yeah.
Well,
And you got written in.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, but instead of turning around and saying, "How do we deal you in? How do we frame this as a getting to yes thing with a motivated developer?" We got the opposite. We had a developer that shut down, and then a process at City Hall that circled the wagons.
Yeah.
as opposed to one that reached out to everyone and said, how are we going to get you in this new car today?
And I'll defend the A's because, and I'm going to say something that they will never admit to. They had no idea what they were doing. And remember that whole deal where Dave Cobble says, hey, we put in first, it was a $12 billion economic impact, which was the wrong read, was actually the build out, right? And I remember texting him and saying, well, if you're going to go out and say that, why don't you announce you have a $9.7 billion tax increment revenue flow and then get everybody really excited? It was a key to me that they didn't understand their own project in that context. And that's where we come in. Okay.
Yeah.
We have to be a blank hole enough, if you will, to jump in and say, hey, look, this is great, but you're going to steal us off the rails. You need to come back home. And my point, Mike, is that everyone was too nice to each other, as opposed to saying, all right, toot sweet, we got to get this thing going. And on that note, where is this thing going?
Well, I think, the short term right now is, there's no motivator. There's no project sponsor. You are not going to see the A's if they come back with their tail between their legs at some point in time from Nevada, which I guess is possible. We're not going to rule that out. Howard Terminal is an even longer shot than it was before. All the reasons why you couldn't cut a deal in July of 2021 are still there. And they're all more expensive and more complicated. And now people's feelings are hurt. And you're going to have to regain a lot of trust. So, if you're going to go anywhere and you're coming back to Oakland, the safe and easy bet is the place where you already own $85 million worth of real estate and it's already zoned and you have entitlements and you don't have any opposition. That's the Coliseum. I don't see this ownership group doing that. Every fiber of their being for the last 20 years has said, I don't want to be in East Oakland.
Yep.
But that's obviously still the easy, logical place to be if you just need a place to play baseball. And I guess that's maybe part of the silver lining of the whole Vegas thing is if you're looking at the Tropicana site, they're really relegating themselves to a place where they just play baseball. It's not a huge new development. It's not thousands of new, residences that are financing the thing. It's we're paying for a stadium. How do we do it?
Yep.
So, but I think if they come back, it would be very hard pressed to make the waterfront their home. I mean, there's just so many questions that are still outstanding, and the rest of the world is going to keep turning, right? So,
I'm going to ask you a question that I think is on the minds of many. Don't get upset with me for asking it, but it's a logical question to be asked, and please do not let it terminate our friendship. I won't do that. But do you feel some responsibility for causing the Athletics to leave?
Yeah, of course. And I don't think that's a negative question at all. I mean, I think when you're looking at the way that this was set up, the way the A's have proceeded, they put us in a position where we had to tell them that, it wasn't going to work. And we've been very upfront with the A's from the very start. We have a philosophical problem with that location. You're never going to get us to support putting a stadium on the waterfront. That being said, if we lose that philosophical debate and it's going to go forward anyways, then you have to be practical and you have to sit down with us and you have to talk about how you're going to mitigate this project so it works for everybody, because you're moving into our neighborhood, right?
Yep.
And it's the place where we've made all of our investments. It's the place where the public has made their investment. The city is blessed with really two different investments in East Oakland and West Oakland. West Oakland was developed to move goods. East Oakland was developed to move people. And like you said before, they are offered one or the other. They took both.
Mm-hmm.
And waterfronts change, right? They change all the time, right? So you can't expect them to always be the same, but we're going to jealously guard what we have in terms of working industrial waterfront space throughout the United States, but definitely in California. we're just not going to create anymore, right? Once it's gone, it's gone. So this is and I was actually reflecting on this the other day, Zenny. This is the fourth waterfront stadium or arena project that's been proposed that we've had a hand in stopping on the West Coast in the last 15 years. So there was one in San Diego. There was a proposal for a Chargers Stadium on the 10th Avenue Marine Terminal that made it onto the ballot in San Diego when we beat that at the ballot box. There was another proposal you might remember, there was a group that was trying to buy the Sacramento Kings, move them up to Seattle. They wanted to build a brand new arena in Soto in Seattle, which was basically on the industrial side of
that's right,
Mariners Seahawks complex.
Yeah.
And right next to Safeco. And us and ILWU and the Port of Seattle killed that. We had a very, very small role in Pier 3032 when the Warriors were proposing to move their stadium there. And obviously they built Chase on the other side of the Embarcadero on the non-water side. This is the fourth one. So, that is never going to go away. There's always going to be development pressure on the waterfront. And one of our goals is to make sure that we're protecting marine industrial property where it is.
Hey, I got to ask you on that note, what do you think about the Oakland Vulcan Oversized Terminal, which in its latest iteration doesn't involve coal and yet now is involved in court? Are you guys watching that at all? Or
Yeah. They're not a member of ours, but and we don't have a lot of representation for folks in the bulk business. But I hope that project gets finally gets built and gets the green light, and they're able to move product that's clean and safe. And there's absolutely no reason why. People are going to quibble about commodities all the time. They always have. There's different reasons for doing that, but those are commercial issues. And if you're the city, again, I'd say it has nothing to do with anything else. If you knew that was an issue of yours ahead of time, and they did, you should have put that in the contract. You should have put it in your environmental documents. And then if you come back later and you change your mind, and this is just a general business proposition. You tell someone that you're doing business with, hey, I've changed my mind. I want to do it differently. You don't just go around and say, well, I'm just going to change the terms without working with you. Right. It's a business deal. You got to pay for it.
Yeah.
And if you're going to change the terms of your contract, you can do it. You just got to do it right. And it's more expensive to do it after the fact than if you factored in at the beginning. And the reason why the city keeps losing on those issues in court with OBOT isn't because their position on coal is good or bad or right or wrong. It's because they went about doing it the wrong way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they handled all that completely wrong. Regarding Howard Terminal, I have to ask, how much time do you have, by the way?
I'm good.
Okay. There is this matter of the transfer. Let me take this entirely the other way. Let's say that, okay, right now, if someone wanted to restart, and I would assume someone does, planning for the development of the Howard Terminal District in some kind of way, there's still this matter of having to get, or is it a matter of having to get permitting away from, do you just revert it back to the port? How would you all like to see, how would you like to proceed forward with this? I mean, I have my ideas, but I'm more interested in hearing your idea than mine.
I mean, the fact of the matter is that the A's never had anything more than exclusive negotiating agreement and a non-binding term sheet.
Right.
That
was it.
That's the extent of their rights to that property. So if you want to do anything with it, right, you still have to go back to the port. Port would have to go back through either some sort of RFP process or some other sort of public process where they, eventually entertain bids or potential contracting agreements or another E&A. Anyone can propose anything to a property owner, including a public property owner. to do business with them. Those processes are up to the port. We've had a couple of preliminary conversations with folks over there, asking them if they've decided what they're going to do, and the answer obviously is no. They have not begun that process internally of even deciding what's next. And I think that's wise. I think they need to let the dust settle a little bit too.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of other things that have been going on at the port that have been put on hold because of all the acrimony and fighting over Howard Terminal that are good with respect to long-term planning and issues around how the port and the city are going to grow together, right? So a couple of years ago, Danny Wan, the port executive director, put out that he wanted to have an industrial lands policy and create some buffering. Those are things obviously we support, but that conversation was essentially put on hold because of Howard Terminal. And then on the city side,
Mm-hmm.
those same types of conversations have been going on too. They wanted to have a conversation about industrial lands policies and about how you protect residents and industrial sites from the impacts and mitigation necessary to accommodate each other. Those are good conversations to have. Most of those kind of got put on hold because of Howard Terminal too. And there's a downtown Oakland specific planning process that addresses this a little bit. Also, a lot of that was kind of put on hold because of Howard Terminal. Comments on that plan zoning are due this Friday. And the way that that's set up actually is pretty respectful of the fact that there needs to be a buffer and there needs to be some transition in that area. And Howard Terminal, ironically, was part of that original planning area. And it got cut out of the downtown Oakland specific plan altogether because they were moving forward with this different specific planning process for the just for that property.
Right.
So, there's a context for it, right? And all those types of decisions about long-term general plan issues need to be dealt with by the city. The zoning issues need to be dealt with. And then the port itself needs to go through a process where they're being a little introspective, but they're also open to ideas from potential suitors. What I will say is, obviously, if someone walks into that site now and they say, I could do what the A's did, only better, I would find that really hard to believe.
Mm-hmm.
The project in and of itself has, if you're going to be moving residential or high intensity commercial uses in there that look a lot different than what you would expect they would look like for waterfront retail serving or visitor serving, kind of low intensity Jack London Pier 3090 type of stuff. Seaport Village in San Diego, Ports of Call in San Pedro. You know what that looks like, right? You know what that level of intensity is. And that isn't enough economic activity and investment to make all the infrastructure you need to do and the mitigation you need to do worth it. And frankly, that's where, the A's were really trying to cut corners too.
Yep.
Right? And so that's the trick. I mean, I think, getting housing in there would be really, really, really hard. So the best case scenario, if you're an A's fan, you're like, I really want Howard Terminal to happen, would be for them to come back and try to do this project with absolutely no ancillary development whatsoever. Right? Because that's the easiest, that's the cheapest, and that's the thing that you want to see. But I also think that same shoe is on the other foot, right? If you walk in and you're trying to do Brooklyn Basin and Howard Terminal,
sure,
that's hard to do.
Yeah,
Very
they
hard.
wouldn't get it through. And this goes back to what I told Dave originally when I encouraged him to use tax increment financing on April 4th of 2017. Not going to be able to get a project through without a pledge to develop affordable housing.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
that,
I think affordable housing is in the baseline.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'm saying
Yeah,
that this is above and beyond that, right? I mean,
yeah,
you're not going to get, if you're a developer and you're not the A's, you're not going to get the same level of public grant assistance that they got, right? I mean, it's
right.
just not going to happen. And so right there behind that, you're behind that eight ball. Like you're just not going to have access to the same resources they do. And that's a real challenge. It makes a site nearly impossible to develop. You still, and then on top of that, you still have all the other access issues, right?
Hmm.
Um, and you still have the DTSC issue. I mean, that site is still needing to be cleaned up. Um, One of the things that was a problem for the A's, and was going to continue to be a problem, and one of the reasons why, um, you and I and other folks have noted they actually didn't have entitlements on that site,
Right.
is because they didn't have approvals from the State Department of Toxic Substances Control. They didn't have approvals from the Public Utilities Commission. They didn't have approvals from State Lands Commission. And despite the removal of the poor priority use, they didn't have a permit from BCDC.
Yeah. Mike,
All those things.
how can they do a development project without having a proper checklist? I mean, don't you think this really
They
calls
have.
into question,
Oh,
how competently this thing was done?
yeah, they have. Um, I think from the very start, the goal was to just create enough momentum to snowball this thing across the finish line and dare people to say no. And
That's a bold statement. So you're basically saying that you think that basically they really didn't know what they were doing. Um, they were just sort of spitballing it as they went.
I think they knew what they were doing in the big picture. I think they knew that if they could check boxes and create political momentum for the project, that they would get approvals. Whether the approvals were sufficient, whether or not they actually did what they intended them to do, as when you look at all the public agencies, I don't think they cared.
You know what I have this image of in my head as I hear you say that? You know how you're like in this dark room in the old days, they had this projector, and before things really got going, somebody would take their finger up and they would kind of do it.
Right,
That's what that's what it looks like,
right,
I mean,
right.
uh,
I say that in part because that's kind of what they were trying to set up when they went to Sacramento and got AB 1191 passed. That was the bill that set up the BCDC process to happen in a certain number of days. They basically were trying to predetermine what the State Lands Commission process
yep.
was. Um,
That was also signed into law the same day as SB 293 Skinner.
it was.
That was I
It
mean,
was.
October 11th, 2019. Yeah, that
And
was.
they knew ahead of time that those were big hurdles. Um, and I think that's one of the things that we heard from Dave, and I think it was his only Bay Area interview afterwards, after the Las Vegas conversation happened, um, uh, whenever that was, 3 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, we still had years worth of work to do before you could even think about turning a shovel in the Bay Area. And he's right. He still had a lot of discretionary approvals to go through.
Yeah.
And you'll remember when they made their announcement in November 2018 that they picked Howard Terminal, that they were planning on having first pitch this season,
Yeah, that's right.
2023.
That's right.
To do that, it's not because he didn't have and John Fisher didn't have really good attorneys telling them exactly what their entitlement process looked like and how long it would normally take. Right? They've got some of the best and smartest people working for them on their environmental stuff. They've been around forever. They know the business in and out, and they knew what their timeline was supposed to be. But they still announced that anyways. I mean, basically saying we're going to have this done in 4 years. And the only reason that happens, putting aside COVID, because obviously no one knew that was going to happen, is if you have a vision of how you're going to navigate all of those very complex processes in a very
Hmm.
short amount of time. And I just don't think that that they're dumb. I mean,
Well,
if
it's
you're not
not
being
that
polished,
I'm
right?
gonna I'm gonna challenge you on that one. I don't think that they were dumb, but there are maladies regarding how to get development done in the Oakland context that they weren't aware of, and I believe they expected the city to be aware of because if you think about it, Mike, they let the city guide them on the process,
That,
right? And
absolutely.
I remember there was a memo I happened to run across that was from Betsy Lake, and she was actually pointing out the drawing items that were outstanding from the athletics. You probably saw that
Oh
too.
yeah, yeah,
Remember that?
yeah.
And
That was
uh,
what led up to the summer 2021 non-binding term sheet deal.
yeah,
Yeah,
but it was also just before Bob Manfred then turned around and said, "Hey, we're not going to make it. This is 2027. That's too late. We need to get something done now." And then started, squawking about Las Vegas. And then Libby's response was, after having not done it, and this is what was shocking to me, saying we need to have a meeting with the county, but still, and I know I say this like a broken record because there is a process. Every time we have done redevelopment in our town, and you know this, we've always started with okay, the survey area,
yeah.
and then the boundary, and we establish that first. We start collecting the tax increment. Hold on one second. I gotta just 1 second. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
I just gotta my. I'll just say this candidly. My mother was concerned that uh, our security camera stopped working, and it's actually working.
Oh,
So yeah, that's an important thing. So I'm just gonna let her know that because that's why I installed the cameras to keep us safe. Hold on a second. Um, Only take a second. Yeah, I tested it. It works. I'm going back to my interview, but you restart your iPad, but the cameras do work. You're welcome. You're welcome. So yeah, I have 5 cameras installed around the place here. So anyway, um, family first, folks. Always.
absolutely.
So anyway, uh, I have to ask you too.
Yeah.
What's what do your clients say about the next steps? What do they want to see now?
Um, we're looking forward to having that conversation with the port about essentially, getting that property um, as part of a vision. Like what do they want to do? I mean, that's a conversation that we need to have. It's a conversation that obviously needs to be done in the context, and the context for us is, what's happening there now is there's still containers there, there's still trucks there, there's still chassis there. We obviously needed that capacity during the height of the pandemic. um, so if the intention is to again help us grow and maintain our business, we really need to have a conversation about what the port wants to do. And then again, it's in this context of there's a fabric there that needs to have some real kind of new. We have to build new trust. We have to build a lot of new lines of communication because they've all kind of been shut down, right? I mean, our
Mm-hmm.
terminal came in and it forced everyone to their corners, um, and we need
Wow.
to break out of that. We need to have just some real honest and good and frank conversations with people about what they want to have happening down there.
John Marks is asking. He says, for Mike Jacob, can the Oakland government reopen negotiations with the A's at Howard Terminal?
Oh yeah, yeah, and I think you've heard that from everybody. Everyone's willing to sit down and talk if they want to come back. I do think there's a lot of undercurrent though of the like, but maybe not with these guys.
Yeah. I think the thing about it is you want somebody to come back to the table. The last thing that you do is say, "Oh, hey, I want you to sell your team." Uh, that was not the smartest thing to do in the world.
If you're in any business and you have an opportunity to work with people, you're going to take that opportunity.
Yeah,
If you have specific personal issues with people, if you're the city of Oakland, you need to put those personal issues aside and do what's best for the city. That's why you got elected, or that's why you got appointed. Same thing at the port. And the same thing is true for the A's. If they have the same ownership and management team and they come back with their tail between their legs, they need to know that they're coming back with their tail between their legs.
yeah, you're right, because they did handle. And I think you're the best example. They did handle discussions with people that they didn't have to have as adversaries, as if they were adversaries. They didn't necessarily have to have an adversarial relationship with you, did they?
No. You can agree to disagree on things. You
Yeah,
can negotiate things. We weren't going to come out and actually nobody should. The city shouldn't have either. Nobody should. Nobody should walk into a potential development agreement with another party and say yes, but let me negotiate something with you. The position always is maybe, but no, if you don't do this for me, right? And
right.
that should be your stance up until the time you have an agreement, right? That's just what a negotiation is. Um, if you go back to the very first piece of legislation that the A's did, which was their CEQA streamlining bill a couple years ago,
Hmm.
I think one of the best examples of that is they had EBHO, East Bay Housing Organization, as one of the sponsors, or I'm sorry, one of the supporters of their bill.
Right.
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 But when it comes to time to actually close the deal, where's the affordable housing world? It's on the opposite side. Right. They had people in their coalition, and they couldn't keep them in the fold. Where was West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project at the beginning of the project? Oh, wait, they were with the A's. They kept saying we're going to have an environmental justice component.
Yep.
By the time the community benefits agreement process had kind of wrapped up, where was Ms. Margaret Gordon? On the outside,
Yeah.
saying this wasn't good enough, right? So they started out with a lot of goodwill. They started out with people that were project partners. The very first conversations we had were in summer of 2018. I think I told you this. Tom Guarino set them up between me and Tom.
Rest in peace. He was
Absolutely.
PG&E PR guy.
And uh, and and we were having a conversation about what would this have to look like. We had some very preliminary conversations with Taj and Dave, and bringing people to the table. They met with A's met with Union Pacific Railroad, I think 4 or 5 times,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But by the end of those conversations, not only had they not made progress, they convinced UP to not only sue them over the EIR, they brought Capital Corridor with them.
Yeah, sure did.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's another great example. Capital Corridor is a current partner with the A's at the Coliseum for making sure people are taking Amtrak trains to their games.
Mm-hmm.
They have marketing agreements together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they sued them over this project. Right.
And it's amazing now I think about it, how as I roll back, as I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm in my mind's eye, I'm rolling back the development timeline of events, and you can make an argument that the Athletics did a great job of building their own opposition as they went.
Here's a great example, and then I'll probably wrap it up because we're almost at 3. But if you're at that spot, right, you're in Howard Terminal, there's no mass transit options for you. You're in the Bay Area.
Right.
What's your number one transit lifeline? AC Transit.
Right.
AC Transit.
Transit. Yep.
Why weren't you in talking to AC Transit on day one of your project. And yet, by the time the EIR was done, here comes the AC Transit comment letter on the environmental impact report, and it's scathing. And I talked to a couple of
And Dave was thinking gondolas. Remember that gondolas?
and I talked to a couple of the directors over there after that, and they said they never reached out to us. Right? I mean, that's just crazy. I mean, honestly.
Yeah, it is. But that's why, if I were in charge of the project, I would not let them hang out there on a tightrope like that. I would say, we got to bring you in because this is going off the rails. And as your partner, I'm really requesting that you allow us and our specialists to help you out with that. We'll, have a monthly meeting in the mayor's office, large conference room over dinner, and
Right.
we'll hash this out.
So maybe we just closed that circle on your earlier question to me, which is maybe they should have let the city take over some of their stuff.
Yeah,
But
the city, I hate to say it, the city ought to have been blankety blank enough to say, you know what, we're going to take this over. But I go back to what Libby said to me in her press conference.
Yeah.
They were really out to lunch as to what to do. If you're going to admit to me on camera that you don't know what to do with respect to lead development, tax increment financing, then it begs the question: what else don't you know? She said that, though.
I think that's a good way to end the interview. I mean, what else don't you know is the story of the day. I think the A's are likely to be in Las Vegas, but we don't know anything.
And what bothers me, the reason why I turned again real quick is because we didn't do a debrief after the Raiders. Libby turned around and did the same thing with this art project that she did with the Raiders. There was nothing, there was no introspection. How can we do this differently? Not wanting to listen to another head. And what's the definition of insanity, Mike? You keep doing the same thing over and over again.
Expecting different results.
Right. That's it.
Yep.
Come on back, man. We gotta keep talking.
Thanks, sir.
Hey, stick around in the background, folks. Hey, folks, before I go, Thursday at 2 o'clock Pacific, 5 o'clock, my longtime friend Jen Friel is going to come on. Big star. She sold her blog, Talk Nerdy to me, to the developer, Mike, of Two Broke Girls. She had another program. Has a fascinating story of autism, and I can't wait to have her on to talk about it. 2 o'clock Thursday Pacific, 5 o'clock Eastern. That ends this broadcast, folks. Subscribe to Zenny62 and bookmark oaklandnewsnowblog.com.